elements. Let's add an element to our DataMiner system and also take a look at the export and import functionality we have available in DataMiner to do bulk editing or to transfer a whole part of your DataMiner system from, for instance, your staging environments to your production environments. So first we're gonna take a look at the element list. That's gonna be our starting point to add a new element, one new element with a wizard. And the wizard basically contains a series of settings we need to configure. So that's gonna be important to know how we need to exactly configure our elements when we add an element in there. Also editing and duplicating, that's gonna be the same wizard, of course. You don't necessarily have to use the wizard. You can also do an export to Excel, do bulk editing in there and import it again, or do an export into a package that allows you to basically transfer a whole configuration from, for instance, your staging to your production environments. So first of all, the element list, so that's on the view card. So if we open up a view card, you do have below this view all your elements. In there, you can just right-click to add a new element in the right-click menu from there. That's going to add it into your root view. You can, of course, go to a certain subview as well, a certain site, right-click in there to immediately add a new element from there. I do often use the surveyor right-click menu, so you can do exactly the same from your surveyor. Let's maybe open up my DataMiner cube. So here I have my DataMiner cube. If I want to add a new device or element in my Brussels view, you simply open up the Brussels view and you can go to below this view and right click in there, go to new elements. But you can also, if I just close that down again, just right click on Brussels and go for new element in there. That's going to bring you to the same thing. So note you can also edit, of course, any existing element. That's going to give you exactly the same wizard, but already populated with all the settings of the selected element. Deleting, duplicating, deleting speaks for itself. Duplicating is going to take the same settings of an existing element and giving you, again, the wizard, but allowing you to change the name and the IP address, for instance, of the element and easily create a duplicate of the same device or element you already created. And the rename is just simply changing the name without opening the whole wizard. So as I said, I'm gonna go from the surveyor because that is typically what I start from. Now, let's take a closer look. Settings when you create a new element and edit that's an existing element are practically the same. Of course, the wizard is always the same. That's the wizard we see here. So we're going to go through the different pages and the different settings we have. So the first page is the most important page, and over there we already see a couple of fields which are indicated in red, and basically that's the minimum we need to specify before we will be able to continue. So let me remove myself for a second. So you have the next and previous, and the create button will only be available when everything is populated that is needed to create the elements, and you can go for next and previous to go through the edit, view, and properties page. Now, the edit page is the most important page, as I mentioned. The first thing is the name. You need to specify a unique name. It needs to be a unique name in the DataMiner system so that we can easily identify a name in just a simple drop-down. Optionally, you can also specify a description. If you want to add some more information, you can easily do so in a description with some longer text, for instance. The next thing is already an important thing. You might remember that I said that in the DataMiner system, everything is synchronized. If I add a new driver onto the system, it's automatically distributed across all my DataMiner nodes. While when you're adding an element, one specific element to a DataMiner system, you need to choose on which node you want to install it, because there's going to be one DataMiner node that is going to be responsible for pulling that data source, getting that information into the DataMiner system, and also keep track of all the alarms it is generating and the trending. So that's going to be an important choice. So typically you will choose a node that still has, of course, sufficient capacity to handle another element. And maybe if it's regionally distributed, you might need to choose a node which is in the same location or a near location and not on the other side of the world. So if you only have one DataMiner agent, that's going to be easy. That's going to be pre-populated. That's going to be our case. I'm going to come back to the replication in just a second. Next thing I need to specify is what kind of device are we talking about? Which data source are we talking about? So that's basically which driver we need to use. We refer in the DataMiner system, a driver is referred to as being a protocol. So you need to choose a protocol, which could be like a Microsoft platform, a Cisco manager, or any kind of driver we have in the more than 5,000 drivers we have available. So the driver needs to be installed on the DataMiner system already, but you can easily add one here as well. And we'll talk about the management of the protocols in the protocols module. So we're not going to go into too much detail here. Whenever you choose the protocol, it will normally already immediately specify the production version, so we don't need to worry too much now about the versioning of drivers. Whenever you choose a protocol, there will be some additional fields and configuration that will pop up below here, depending on which driver you chose. Because certain drivers are communicating over SNMP or HTTP web services. So depending on which kind of protocol and way of communicating with the data source, you will have different things you will need to specify. We'll take a look at that in just a second. Optionally, you can already specify an alarm and trend templates. We will discuss the alarm and trend templates in the respective modules. But if you already have some, you can immediately choose the correct alarm and trend template while adding your element. So you just specify a name, you specify which protocol it is, and then we will need to specify the IP address in most of the cases. But first, that replicate. If you enable that checkbox, you will have an additional section here, replicate element. What is this about? Well, typically DataMiner will directly go to typically the IP address of the data source and interrogate and get all the information from that data source. But let's say that the data source is already being polled by one of your DataMiner agents somewhere in your system, and you don't want to double poll your data source because certain like devices, they might have limited CPU and you don't want to stress the CPU with too much polling. So if it is already being polled by another DataMiner system, you could easily just say, I want to replicate this element and I want to actually connect to another DataMiner agent by specifying the IP address or host name, connect with a certain username and passwords, retrieve the elements from that DataMiner, and just select the existing element from another DataMiner agent. And what will happen is on this DataMiner system, where I'm adding this replicated element, it will not go directly to the device or the data source. It will actually ask the other DataMiner agent, which is already interrogating the element and getting all the information from the data source, to just pass it onwards to this DataMiner. So this way you avoid double polling. There is already a DataMiner agent polling the information, so I just ask this DataMiner agent to pass it on. Now, be aware that when you specify a username and password, the security of the user is of importance. If it's only a read-only user, you will never be able to do sets on here. If the user has effectively write access as well, you will be able to do write access in this DataMiner system as well, depending of course on your security rights in this DataMiner system. So replication is typically a more special case where you want to avoid double polling and more than one DataMiner agent is effectively polling, or you need this data source in more than one DataMiner system. Now, going back, if I select to my regular settings, I could say, whenever I choose a specific driver, depending on that driver, you will have a section that pops up below there. In this case, just to start off, we have a very simple driver that supports serial communication. So if it's serial communication, you have two ways. Either you go directly serial on a certain COM port, you can specify the data bits, the start bits, the baud rates, all these kind of settings. Or typically, you will go for TCP/IP and you will connect to a serial gateway, and then all of these settings like baud rates, start bits, stop bits, you will need to configure that on the serial gateway. That's what we saw in the serial gateway module. So note also that certain settings might be limited. So it is possible that like a baud rate, that only specific values are supported. So in the driver, we can define what this type of device or this driver supports. Also, the bus address, for instance, can be restricted if there is a bus address involved. So it all depends on what the driver allows you to populate in here. And moreover, it is also possible that multiple ports are actually popping up here. So it is possible that you, for instance, have an SNMP connection popping up here together with an HTTP connection, because maybe certain pieces of data were retrieving through SNMP and other pieces of data were retrieving through HTTP. So it is possible you get two blocks there with two connections we are making towards the device. As I said, serial, we don't really have serial ports on a server these days or a VM. So typically we will go for TCP/IP and we will connect to a specific IP address and port of that serial gateway. You might remember from the serial gateway module, the Moxa device has 4001 as the TCP/IP port for the first serial port, 4002 for the second serial port, and so on. So you specify the IP address of your serial gateway together with the port it needs to connect to. I will come back to the timeouts. Note the network, it's disabled here because we only have one network. Typically, you want to leave that on auto. The routing table on the operating system will decide if it needs to go out from the DataMiner agent towards the device through network interface 1 or network interface 2 or 3, or depending on how many network interfaces you have on the operating system. So that's where it needs to go out onto the network, but auto is just fine. If we go for an SNMP device like the Cisco Manager, in this case, we will be able to choose the SNMP version. So you can go for SNMP version 1, 2, or 3, depending on what's supported, and the IP address or host. Also note that the IP address, you can type in the IP address, but that can be v4 or v6. So an v6 IP address is also supported in here, as well as a host name or a DNS name. Next to that, we have in the more advanced section or the more SNMP settings, the port number, which is by default 161. Normally we should not have to touch that. And then we have the get and set community string. So by default, it's populated with public-private, but note that you can change that, but you could also use the credentials library here. So instead of specifying here public-private, or could be, of course, something different, something more secure, you could say. But if you have like 100 of those switches and you need to each time populate that in here, and maybe tomorrow the IT decided to change it, you have to change it 100 times. So you can actually use a credentials library, and I can quickly show you. It's in the System Center underneath the System Settings in the Credentials library. Let me show you. So if I go by clicking on my username to the System Center, and let me close the surveyor, and I go to system settings and I have a credentials library there. Here I can actually add new credentials. I can give it a name, for instance, for my Cisco, and you can choose if it's community credentials for SNMP v1 and v2 or SNMP v3. Let me just go for the easy ones. And you can specify here a public, private, or something more secure in here. And also allow who has access to that. So this way you store your credentials on one location so you can easily reuse them across different elements. I'm not gonna save that now, I'm just gonna discard that. So that's a quick trick you have there with the credentials library. As I said, timeout, I will go into more detail on that later on. GPIB is a little bit more a special case. That's more for spectrum analyzers. I'm not going to go into too much details on this one. So if you have a spectrum analyzer, it is possible you might need to specify some GPIB connection details, the address, the IO API, the things you basically configure in the tool indicated here. There is also more information in the DataMiner help on how to set up all of this with this tool, but that's a little bit not for this training session, you could say. So you can find more details in the help if you would need to do so for a spectrum analyzer. Now, more advanced settings. Below there, you will have some more advanced element settings, just a couple of more less frequently used settings, you could say. The first one is the slow pulse settings. Slow pulse settings, I would say you only need to activate that in very specific cases. What does it do? It basically makes sure if the element goes into timeout, that it is not continuously doing high-speed retries, you could say. Well, high speed, there will be a timeout, of course, but it's continuously doing retries, but after a certain period of timeout, that it will back off a little bit and say like, only once in a while I will do a check if the element is back online. So what you can basically configure is say that the element goes into slow pull mode, like backing off, after 30 seconds of timeouts or after 5 timeouts. And then it will do a ping like every 30 seconds. It will check if the device is back online. This is, for instance, interesting if you have a bus and multiple devices are actually being pulled on the same bus. If you would have one device that goes into timeout, it would basically occupy that bus with a lengthy timeout, and all the other elements will be influenced by this one device going down. So that's a typical use case where you can do a slow pull. So that's only under very specific circumstances. The enable SNMP agent allows you to take all the metrics from that data source into DataMiner and to make it available northbound through a virtual SNMP agent. So it doesn't matter if you're talking HTTP or serial or SNMP or whatever to the actual data source. You pull it into DataMiner, you have it in DataMiner, and here optionally you can activate it to make all that information available through a virtual SNMP agent. And then northbound, we create a virtual IP address. You need to specify a virtual IP address with a subnet. And then other systems are basically able to do a SNMP get or set on a specific metric, and DataMiner will go maybe serial or HTTP to the actual data source to do the settings or to do the reading of the values. There is also a possibility to override the default get and set community string. Now, you can also create an element hidden. We've seen hidden elements through in the introduction. Then by default, it won't be shown in your list of elements, and it will never be shown in the surveyor. That's typically for elements that are not of great interest for the operator. You just have them there to gather some information into the DataMiner system, and typically you will use it elsewhere to make it available to the operator. The read-only, that's you could say a special security right, you could call it maybe. This has nothing to do with security. We still need to cover security in the security module. But here you can actually add an element to the DataMiner system in a so-called hard-coded read-only manner. Let's say you have a Cisco switch, and there's actually a third-party company that is managing the Cisco switch, and you are not allowed to touch it or to change the admin state of a board or anything like that. So you cannot change anything on there. Nobody, not even the administrator or the super administrator. But you do want to add the element into your DataMiner system to just see the traffic that goes through the ports. So only for monitoring and trending purposes. So this way you can actually add the elements, activate the read-only, and nobody, even the super administrator in DataMiner, will be able to ever change something or to change the admin state up or down on this element. So that really makes sure that this is never going to accept and set on this kind of device. Read-only, that's a hard-coded security right, you could say. And the last option here is the element state that allows you to add an element immediately in a paused or stopped state, but by default it will immediately become active, and that's what we will do in our exercise later on. Now that's timeout that I've mentioned. So in this case, I have a Philips device, TCP/IP port that I configured, but then I have some timeout settings. The first thing is the timeout of a single command. So whenever DataMiner sends something to the data source, it's expecting a result back, and that's the command timeout. In this case, it's 1500 milliseconds. It's expressed in milliseconds. So that's a typical thing for more like, you could say, low-level serial commands. If we're talking about SNMP, maybe you should go to 3 seconds or 3000 milliseconds or maybe 5000. And depending, of course, on the device, it might take some time for the device to gather the results and to get it back to you. So you have to be careful that the timeout is long enough for the device to be able to process whatever you have requested. We are also able in the driver to make sure that we already suggest a good timeout. And of course, whenever the device or the data source does not get back within that 1500 milliseconds, we will do a number of retries of that same command. So we will retry the same command 3 times in this case. If it still fails, we will continue with the next command and so on. And basically those command and retries timeout settings have nothing to do with the timeout that I can see on my elements. Let me check. Do I have somewhere an element in timeout? Yes, I do have. So we do see here in this section here, I have this conditional access server that is apparently in timeout. So it only appears in timeout when you are activating, and this is by default activated, you include the timeout, and the element goes into timeout state when it's not responding for 30 seconds. So if for 30 seconds the commands are failing and failing and the retries are failing and the next command is failing, if that continues on and on for 30 seconds, then my element goes into timeout. I will have the orange cross here, and I will also have that timeout alarm here in my alarm console that says that the conditional access server is no longer responding. So that is an important setting here, the 30 seconds that I configured. Note you can disable the timeout. That's of course not recommended, unless maybe I mentioned you have 2 connections or maybe 3 connections you can have, one through SNMP and one through HTTP, for example. You can actually choose whether you want to generate a timeout, whether the SNMP module is maybe not responding. or the HTTP or both. So you could say like if HTTP is still replying, then it's fine. SNMP, sometimes maybe that SNMP agent in the devices is doing a little bit strange now and then. So I won't take a timeout into account on the SNMP. That's a possibility. So you do have that timeout on the command, and as I already mentioned, the timeout on that element, which is an important one to generate the alarms. So to summarize the timeout settings we had, so the DataMiner agent is sending a command X to the data source, and it's expecting back a result, but it does not get a result back. So after 1500 milliseconds, it does a retry 1, a retry 2, retry 3, and then it goes on with the next command Y. So the purple arrow, that's the command timeout of 1500 milliseconds we had before with the 3 retries we have. Now, if the element stays into this timeout situation, you could say for a longer period of time, like the blue arrow, let's say 30 seconds. After 30 seconds, then we generate in DataMiner a timeout alarm. The orange cross will be indicated on the icon. The alarm will be there. People will start to worry that the element is no longer responding for one or another reason. It could still be functional. Maybe there's a network interruption. And also, to be complete, the slow poll is indicated here. So maybe after 60 seconds, we go into a slow poll where only once in a while we are sending a ping command. So in the driver, we can define a ping command, or the first command in the driver is going to act as a ping command just to check if it's back online. As soon as it replies, it goes back in normal poll mode, of course. Okay. So that's about the settings we need to do. We will come back to that in an example in just a second. The next page, views, is simply allowing you to choose in which view you want to add your elements. Of course, if I go and right click in my surveyor somewhere, it will immediately add it. So if I right click on Brussels, it will immediately choose Brussels in this tree structure. But do note that you are actually able to add an element into multiple views as well. So it is perfectly possible to add the element, for instance, in Brussels, and also I only have continents here, so here it's only location, but maybe I have another view somewhere down here, which is like a staging or just more on a logical view, an organization of all the modulators or the encoders or the servers. You can also put it in that second view. So then it's basically in 2 views. So with this tree structure, you can easily select multiple views where you want your element to reside. And note that optionally also you could have some properties that you defined, if you define some properties. So remember, we have seen in the Cube sidebar module that there is a possibility to actually add custom properties to elements, also to views and alarms and services. But if you add, for instance, to the elements, if it's a class gold, silver, bronze, you can immediately here in the properties define, while adding this new element in your system, if it's a gold, silver, or bronze. We do have some properties in our system, so we will see that with an exercise. So we'll do an exercise now. We will add on our DataMiner system, the DCP DMA, an element just with a name. It's going to be a Microsoft platform to keep it easy, just production version because that's the default. You can choose already an alarm and trend template if you want. And the virtual IP address, we don't need that. What's the IP address of the server we need to monitor? That's the 127.0.0.1, basically local host, to keep it simple. And we'll leave the timeout settings unchanged and assign the element to your personal view. Actually, I'm going to use the Brussels view. So here I have the Brussels view. So if I want to create the element inside the Brussels view, I can just right click on Brussels, and that's going to be all right from the start off. So I right click on Brussels, go for new elements, And it brings me to the wizard that we have just discussed. So we can go through that just as an example or a recap. So training underscore Microsoft underscore my first name. Optionally, you can add a description. I don't have a choice for the DataMiner agent because my system only has one DataMiner agent. Otherwise, you need to choose, of course, the correct DataMiner agent. Replication is not of interest here. If the Microsoft server would already be pulled on another server, I could replicate it and here point to another DataMiner agent, connect with a username and a password and pick it from there. But I'm not going to do, I'm going to directly pull it from here. So I have a series of drivers which is already available. Note you can immediately add a protocol from here as well. So if you click on the add, you can choose a protocol you have on your desktop or you received from us, or you can filter on there as well. So I'm going to go for a Microsoft platform driver. As soon as I choose the Microsoft platform, you see a number of things changing. That depends on the driver, of course, as I mentioned. First of all, it will choose the production version. We'll see in the drivers in the next module, protocols, how to manage versioning. Let's not worry about that now. Production version is fine. I can choose an alarm and a trend template from the drop-down. I have for both a standard one, so that sounds great. Let's just select that. And the whole section below here popped up the serial connection. So serial, well, actually it's kind of a binary WMI connection that is happening with Microsoft. So don't think about serial like RS-232, but just binary more. So it's going over WMI. And I have no choice. It's TCP/IP network, and I specify the IP address, as I mentioned, 127.0.0.1. There's no port here because basically WMI, it has already the port defined into the protocol. It has a fixed port, so we don't need to worry about the port. So as you can see, the port is actually disabled here. It's not being used, the network. The timeout, it is hard-coded in this driver on 60 seconds. We chose not to make that editable because there are some lengthy queries that we might need to do on a server, for instance, to retrieve the event viewer. So we need that 60 seconds on larger systems. So it's advised not to change that to a lower value without any retries. And you can include the timeout. I'll leave that as it is. And the advanced settings, we've gone through that. Slow poll is more advanced. Virtual SNMP agent northbound, I don't need that. I definitely don't want it hidden. Read-only, that's not for now. And it can be active. Yeah, that's all fine. So the only thing I had to do is specify a name, choose that it's a Microsoft, specify the IP address of the Microsoft server, and we're good. We are actually already able to create it, but we can also click on next to verify the next tab page. So we basically have 3 tab pages here. So it is going to create it in Brussels. That's perfect. And I can also add it, for instance, in the linking shape here, and also add it in there as well. So I do have the possibility, I won't do it now, to add it into 2 views. Let's go for the next page and verify the properties. So let me check my BERT class that I created before, so I can immediately make it a gold device and maybe already specify a latitude, longitude, a rack position. All these kind of things can be specified as well, depending on which properties you added in your system. And now I'm ready to create my elements. If I click on the create, you already saw it popping up here in the surveyor, so it's added immediately in here. It's still not defined in any color because it still needs to retrieve all the information and start doing the alarming on there. So as soon as we can have a distinction of whether it's green or red, it will pop up the color. Some values already start to populate in here. Some take a little bit longer. Total processor load actually need 2 polls because we need to make a difference between 2 values. It's basically like a number continuously increasing, and we need to calculate that out of that number. So in the meantime, I have everything already populated, and my element is green, and I can verify also in the right-click menu in the stream viewer if the communication is going fine. If you would have any communication problems when adding an element, that's the first place to check, of course, if there would be any access denied or things like that popping up. If you would have an access denied for the Microsoft server, note there is a security page here where you might need to specify a username and a password to be able to connect to that Microsoft server, because the Windows security might not allow you to just immediately pull it. But it's localhost that we have chosen as IP address, so localhost has no security problem. If it would be a remote server, we would need to specify username and password. So that's it. We added our first element. So we went through the wizard, specified all the details, and we added 1 device. But what if we want to add 100 devices? I will not go through that wizard 100 times. I will use the export-import functionality. So let's take a look at the export and import functionality. Well, the export has 2 ways of exporting. You can see it here on the right-hand side. I will discuss both of them. We have the possibility to export a DM import package, something you can import again. So that's a special package. So DM stands for DataMiner. So it's a DataMiner import package. What does it do? If you click on it, you can already see that it basically allows you to export views, services, elements, protocols, templates, alarm templates, trend templates, alarm data, trend data, documents, information event, everything. Basically, you can take a whole tree structure, a complete site with everything in there, with all the configuration, export that, and then go through to another DataMiner system and there import it again. So that allows you basically to create a complete setup on a staging environment, validate it, play with it, then do an export. Maybe I won't include the alarms because it's coming from my staging. I was playing around a little bit for the last couple of days with that environment. So I won't include the alarm data and maybe not even the trend data. That's optional, you can choose. You export it and then you go to your production environment and there you import that into your tree structure again. So how do you do that? Well, you basically click on the hamburger menu of your view card, or as I always do it, you just right click on the object you want to export in your surveyor tree structure. So if you want to export Brussels, you right click on Brussels, you go to actions, and there you go for export. So you can just right click on your view, you export, you choose that DM import, and you choose what you want to export. So you can still fine tune what exactly needs to be in there. You will get an overview of all the protocols and templates and all these kind of things that will be added in there. And you choose also if you want to take the alarm, trend, documents and information events in that package to move it to another DataMiner system. I mean, I can do that, just right click, actions, export, DM import. So it's going to take a look on your DataMiner system, what's in Brussels there. So we can see it will take some Microsoft platform with it, Philips, some Visio files, protocol specific, also some documents. So all of that will be included in there. I don't need any trend data and alarm data. I will start all over. And maybe documents I will remove as well. You can export that, save it onto your desktop, and basically it will grab all the information from your DataMiner system, dump it into that import package, and then you can easily use that import package on another DataMiner system. All right, but I wanted to do bulk editing. That's not possible with the DM import package, because that's just to take a site or a view structure as it is and move it to another DataMiner system. I want to go for that second option, export to a CSV file. Well, actually, if you click on it, you can export all the data. That's what I will do. But you can also export the data as it being visualized on your view card. If you want to copy that to your clipboard, for instance. You can also export only the element IDs or only the IP addresses. Anyhow, I'm just interested in all the data and export it to a CSV. That's the default. You can also go for copy to clipboard and print. So let's do that before I continue. Okay, this one export finished. Okay. So I will export my Brussels view also to a CSV. So export. So I already export that as an DM import. Now I will do it as a CSV. I leave that as it is, all the data to a CSV, export, and save it on my desktop. Okay, perfect. Now, what can I do? I have those two packages on my desktop. So first of all, importing, I can import again the complete DM import package. I won't do that on my DataMiner system here because I already have it. But if I want to, let's assume this was a staging system, I can export Brussels. I can now go to another DataMiner system. On that other DataMiner system, I can just right-click. You can use again the hamburger menu of the view card, or just right-click somewhere in your view structure where you want to put it in. So for instance, going to my operational environment, right-clicking on Europe or on Belgium, and you want to put it underneath Belgium because Brussels is in Belgium. So you right-click on Belgium and you say import the DM import package here. You select the package, you browse, you select it from your desktop, for instance. And again, you have the option to include the alarm templates, trend templates, all the different possible things are again available. So maybe it contains the visuals, the visual overviews, but I don't want to import them. You can still disable it here while importing. It shows you what is going to be imported. So here again, you can fine tune it, what exactly you want to import. Maybe you want to remove one specific element, and then you click on import and it does the magic. So simply you can right click on Belgium, you can go for actions, import, you import the DM import package, you take it again from your desktop, and it will basically show you what exactly you want to import here with all the details. And again, you have some possibility to fine tune that. It's already on here, so I'm not going to import that again. That's to move a complete system or a subsection of a system from one system to another, but we wanted to do bulk editing. That's what we will do in our CSV file. So I exported my Brussels view into a CSV as well. And let's now open that up in Excel, as you can already see on my screenshot at the bottom here. So what I will do is I will open up the exported data.csv that I created or just exported before. So I just double clicked on the exported data.csv that I previously saved on my desktop. So as you can see, it has exported all of the elements that are underneath my Brussels view. So there are a number of IRDs and my training element that I just created. Let me pop up my DataMiner cube so you can see Brussels, the elements be underneath there. So you can see IRD 127 and my Microsoft element that I just previously created. It's all nicely indicated there. And next to that, you basically have a whole series of columns with all the different settings that you will find in that wizard. We've already discussed them in the wizard, but basically all of them, each of them has a specific column that is assigned here. And you also see in here the different properties. So it is of great importance that you start from a CSV file that you exported from your DataMiner system. because it needs to contain the correct columns, of course, with all the different properties of your DataMiner system. So I would advise you always start from an export, do some tweaking, and then you can import it again. Let me go back to the beginning. So you will find all the settings in there, the protocol, the version, the template, the IP address of the element, etc. So now, as I said, it's important to start from from an existing export. But what can you do now? There are three things you can do. You can edit a specific row. So you can just change a name or a protocol or an IP address or any of the settings you can change. But if you are doing an edit, do not touch the DataMiner ID and the element ID, because that's the unique reference we have to know about which element you are talking here. You can change the name of the elements, but we will only know about which element you're talking about if we have that DataMiner ID, element ID reference here. So don't touch the element ID, DataMiner ID, element ID column. And all the other stuff you can change. That's editing. So you can edit any of the existing rows. If you want to add an existing element, you can just add a new row in there, populate all the fields, but leave the element ID empty. Do not assign an element ID because that could conflict with another element. If it's an empty element ID, we know like, okay, that's a new element, we'll create one. The DataMiner ID, you have the option. Either you can specify one and then we will create it on that specific DataMiner agents. If you have 5 DataMiner agents, you can choose on which one it will be created. If you leave the DataMiner ID empty, we will create the element on the DataMiner agent you are connected to with your DataMiner cube. So your entry point of the DataMiner system, there the element will be created if you leave the element DataMiner ID empty. So the DataMiner ID, it can optionally be populated. The element ID must be empty. If it's empty, we'll create a new element. And a third and very important remark is deleting is not possible via the import. Okay, interesting to know. That means that I can just take IRD 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and just right click and say delete. It's gone. It will never be deleted on my DataMiner system because through an import, I can never delete elements. So you can just clean up that Excel and just make it digestible by removing some of your rows, some of your elements, but they won't be deleted in your DataMiner system. We can immediately verify the result. So let's say I want to add 2 of those servers. So what I will do is I will change the name of the existing server and I will add, for instance, _1 to it. And I will now create a new row. And how can I easily do that? Well, I can easily just take it and do it like this. But then you have to be careful because Excel does something like auto increment. So certain things like a port number, you can see here the port number is automatically changing from 0 to 1, and the IP address is changing from 127 to 001. And you might have this kind of result with other columns as well. So be careful. I will undo my change with Ctrl Z. What I will do, I will just do a copy and a paste of that row. And of course, because I want to add a new element, I need to make sure that the element ID is blank. The element ID is blank, so it will create a new element. An element needs a unique name. So the name is, of course, something I need to change as a minimum. And in my case, typically, I would need to change the IP address as well, of course, because that's going to be the next server that I'm adding to my DataMiner system. All the other things are similar because I have 100 of these servers that I need to add. So typically, I just change the IP address and the name of the server. So I could add a whole bunch of them like that. Now, I did an edit of an existing row. I did create a new element in here. I removed some of the clutter from my view here, but that won't impact, that won't delete my elements. So I did the 3 actions here. What I will do is I will click save. Yeah, it saved it. And be aware, if you close it, sometimes Excel doesn't do it now, might ask you to save it again, then it's not necessary to do so. Now, I did change my CSV file and added a new element. You could do 100 of them. Now let's go for that import. So be aware, the import is asynchronous. So I will go for a CSV import, select the file again that I just saved, and it will basically take that file, throw it to the server, and the server, the DataMiner system will take care of handling the processing of the whole file, going one by one through all the different lines that are in there and creating 100 elements maybe, so that might take a few minutes. So it's an asynchronous process, and you can basically check the progress in the information events. That's where we will take a look on what's happening. And note that only when necessary, the elements are being restarted. So only if a decent change is being done to an element, it will restart. So I'm not expecting my elements to restart, except my, probably for that name change, my Microsoft element will restart. Now let's go for that import. So actions, import, and I select, of course, now the CSV import. And then I will be able to select from my desktop that CSV, that exported data CSV that I just saved before. It closes, nothing seems to happen because, as I mentioned, it is here in my information events. So it started the import, and we will be able to verify the progress and see if my new element is going to pop up in here. So I already did one before, so you can actually see that certain things, oh, that's my export that I did before. And here you can see my element has just been renamed to _1. Let me check if I can see that change. Not yet. And I'm still waiting for my second element, which will pop up in any minute now. And you can see it's already created here. You can see that my second element has been created by the element import there. So it is already created, and my success is here as well. But I can see that 4 of them, I had 4 rows in my Excel. 4 of them succeeded, 0 fails, 0 for remote agents. So you can see that effectively, and now my element is also popping up in here. So I already have my BERT2 device that is being added here, and already polling as well. And now the green icon is there as well. So that's how I easily duplicated my element without going through the wizard again. So you can do that easily for like 100 of them, or to do some bulk editing. So in this elements module, we saw how to start from your DataMiner Cube interface to add a new element to your DataMiner system. First, we were using the element wizard, which is the typical default thing you will use. So we went through all the different settings that are important there. You cannot make a mistake with the wizard, so that's always a good thing to use. You can also use it for editing and duplicating, of course. But if you want to take it a step further, remember that you can also export a complete package, a whole subsection of your DataMiner system, to move it to another system, or to export it to Excel, do some bulk editing, and import it back to your DataMiner system. So that's how you can add elements to your DataMiner system. I hope that was clear. And I would say in the next module on drivers, we will discover some more about that versioning of the drivers. See you in the next one.